Since the election, there's a lot going on in media. The left-wingers all realizing they missed out.
You need your own Joe Rogan is the bigger point.
Democrats had their own Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2020.
Gavin Newsom attempting to do a podcast. Okay.
I think he is an evil, cold-blooded lizard person from another planet who possibly is the devil incarnate. You walk around the West Village and you see all these purple-haired, wafy, asexual guys. And it's like, who's going to defend the country that's going to make sure that you can walk around with a pocketbook and purple hair? It's not the liberals who are going to defend that. It's the scary Republicans who are going to stop the barbarians at the gate.
Let's say those who are maybe more Trump sympathetic, big faction, which are openly toying with conspiracies. Some conspiracies are somewhat fun, but there's a side of it that I really don't like.
What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
Darryl Cooper said to take the Mein Kampf with a pinch of salt. Are you fucking kidding me?
We got to clean some of that up.
A DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency subcommittee ran by Marjorie Taylor Green, Congresswoman, coming after the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Defund them.
Defund them?
Defund them completely.
I want to talk about Piers. I've done it a couple of times.
Piers to criticize Israel. Admit that that's true.
2023.
If you don't admit that's true.
Hang on.
There is something to be said about the British tabloid journalist. That is the world that Piers comes from. And that's good television. As it pertains to some of this other stuff, I think something that's happening right now that people can't quite grasp is that
Dave, welcome back to the show. Thank you for taking time out of your ridiculously busy schedule. You're zooming off to Gutfeld, I learned after this, and in the morning you've got Jesse Waters and you're zooming all over the place on a crippled foot, no less.
I've got a banged up knee, and then as if that wasn't bad enough, I come in here asking for a little bit of caffeine. You guys give me coffee in a Madam Vice President Kamala Harris
I thought
mug.
you might appreciate the mug, yeah?
Is this poisoned? What you've done to me? Like, this is a little trick. TV hosts, podcast hosts have tricks.
Trying to throw you,
Sometimes the host sits in a slightly higher chair. They can't quite measure it up. And this was definitely a little...
well, I know she's your girl.
Moved by you. Yes, I do. There's nobody I love. Love and Kamala Harris as a Venn diagram. It would be me in the middle. It's good to see you, Matt.
Great to see you. The thing I wanted to talk to you about is... media. You, of course, are veteran YouTuber, one of the
I know, I'm an
first
OGer now.
OGer, coming from, I guess, the YouTube left with the Young Turks and then building your own empire, the Rubin Report, which we discussed to some extent last time you were on the show and we recorded at your studio down in Florida. But I want to talk about the media landscape because it seems to me, it's one thing we were talking through the election that this was the podcast election and we saw President Trump and JD Vance going on all the quote unquote right-winger podcasts from Theo Von to Rogan, etc. As far as their right wing, if we can really call it right-wing.
Hardcore right-wingers, Joe Rogan. Yeah.
Since the election, something else seems to me very quickly in the 2 months, there's a lot going on in media and a real shift even from before the election. So the left-wingers all realizing they missed out on the podcast. So we have the California governor, Gavin Newsom, attempting to do a podcast.
Because he's got a lot of time. He's doing such a bang-up job, and there's so few problems that he was like, boy, I've really cleaned up this place. There's no homelessness. Economy's going well. Everything's just great. Let me do a podcast.
A long-form podcast.
What an obvious, as if the man hasn't kicked the state in the balls enough. Like, what a giant F-you to everyone that he supposedly is supposed to look after. Just absurd. I'm not a fan of that.
But has he not grown in popularity with, you had Steve Bannon on, and it's showing some sort of humanity. It's the first time I've seen him act like an actual person.
I personally can't put the word humanity and Gavin Newsom in the same sentence, but I'll let you do it.
Yeah, okay.
I think he is an evil, cold-blooded lizard person from another planet who possibly is the devil incarnate. Every single thing that man touches, except his bank account and his winery, goes to shit. The guy destroyed San Francisco as mayor of San Francisco. There's that very famous video from, it's about 15, maybe 18 years ago of him doing his 10-year plan to end homelessness in San Francisco. And of course, San Francisco is basically the walking dead of homelessness now. California, we don't have to go into the laundry list of things. You don't even have to list out the things. Just look at the numbers. Over 1 million people in 3 years have left California. Nobody's going. Do you know anyone that has moved? I'm taking the family and we're moving to California for all that opportunity and cleanliness and all that economic growth. No, Florida is booming. Texas is booming. Tennessee is booming. This guy, he pushed all of the woke stuff. Now he's pretending he has nothing to do with it. What's interesting about the podcast move by him is it's clear that the Democrats are so screwed up right now and the bench is so thin that he's still a guy who has just been exposed as a fraud at every level. He's still in the mix because they've just got nobody. They really have a clown car of crazy people. And he's doing the podcast because he's trying to veer back to the center. So when you watch some of these, so he had Bannon on, who you mentioned, Charlie Kirk, who did a great job with him. He had Michael Savage, radio host, right-wing radio host. And then he's had, I think, a couple lefties.
Yeah, Tim
But
Walz,
they basically, and they basically, they bang him up on all of the policy, gender, what he's done with sanctuary cities, the economy, homelessness, blah, blah, blah. He smiles it off and he's got his good veneers and his slicked back hair and his body motion. I mean, there's something very like on the surface kind of psycho about the guy, like American Psycho. And he pretends he has nothing to do with any of it. You saw the clip where he said that no one in his office ever used the phrase Latinx or Latinx. And then even CNN ran a compilation clip of him saying it multiple times. It's like the guy is just evil. And if that's the moderate route for the Democrat Party, these people are in a lot of trouble.
He seems to be having
the decent Californians, I would say.
They might be in trouble because it seems to be that his popularity is somewhat gone up a little bit, according to at least one poll that I've seen. So he might be.
I don't know about his popularity amongst Californians, but I think he wants to stay in the zeitgeist. That's the thing. He understands
because he wants to be presidential runner.
He wants to be president, right? Like he wants to be president. It's not that complex. So I don't know that anyone that's a Californian that votes potentially for the guy is suddenly like, I did watch him with Charlie Kirk, and after Charlie Kirk mocked him about school closures and gender stuff and everything else, that I'm suddenly more into Gavin Newsom. But I think you're right about the general zeitgeist. We're literally doing it right now.
Yeah.
So that's what he wanted. And he is, I'll give credit where credit is due, like a broken clock is right twice a day. Like he's doing that, and that keeping him in the conversation is working.
But to get into the ring with someone like Charlie Kirk.
That's bizarro land, Charlie Kirk.
Exactly.
Charlie
we'll
King. Yeah. Charlie's not going to be happy about that one.
With him and Bannon, like that takes some courage.
You mean Steve Boner? Charlie King, Steve Boner, and actually Michael Savage, who had on his real last name is Wiener. So there's something going on here.
Well, having those, it just shows some courage, I think, going into the ring with those types, and they can go after him. And
do you think it shows courage? It's interesting because I think to some extent, courage would be if you got some things wrong in the past and you were going to have some sort of mea culpa about them, then to be confronted on air, I think would take courage. I don't think what he's doing takes courage necessarily. I think I genuinely believe this. I think he is such an egomaniac that in his mind, when Charlie literally said to him, he said this thing about how Newsom said to Charlie, my son really wanted to see you today, but I wanted him to go to school. And Charlie was like, well, that's interesting because you closed schools down for 3 years. And he laughed it off. It was just laughed it off. Like he has no shame.
Right.
That's the thing. So I don't think with him it's courage. I think it's pure calculating. I do everything in service to get what I want. I think if it was somebody else, and we've seen these people, I'm one of them. If you have positions, let's say you're on the left years ago and you genuinely wake up and you're like, boy, I was wrong about some positions. I might have said some things about people that weren't true or that weren't fair or whatever. And I'm genuinely going to sit down with them and have like an honest, forthright conversation about it. I think that would take courage, right? The thing that he's doing, I don't think takes courage, but we may look at I don't want to get into like the specific definition of that.
Well, we'll see how it pans out for him.
Yeah.
The other famous example, although she's now said that she has no political ambitions, is Michelle Obama, who's done a podcast with her brother, and it's really badly flopped. I mean, the numbers are appalling. But I went on it just to see the comments, which was fantastic.
Yeah. Didn't they close the comments now because everyone was calling her a man? That's what somebody told me. They shut off the comments.
If they haven't closed them down, they should advise her to close down the comments because it's not doing her any favors. But it's clearly the case that they've realized that there's a problem. more chatter there. Meanwhile, also on the left, it's worth mentioning Young Turks, because I actually would love at some point, maybe we can get into this later, your personal journey, because I'm not sure I fully know your full story. I think the headlines of it, but you were at the Young Turks, and they've, over the last day or two, had a sort of internal civil war where Cenk Uygur, having gone on to Dr. Phil, one of his colleagues or someone who works at Young Turks called Francesca Fiorentini criticized him for doing so, and then Cenk retaliated by banning her from going on another one of the shows within the Young Turks network. But Young Turks is, I'm not sure if it's really a podcast, but it's a long-form independent media platform, and one of the biggest progressives, and they also seem to be repositioning as anti-woke, where they were quite woke before. I actually went on on Piers Morgan with Cenk a week or so ago, and he calls himself a progressive populist. And sort of that seems.
I would call him a lying fraud, basically. This is a guy who's ushered in all of this stuff. They're fortunately, as far as I haven't even heard this story, but fortunately they're not as popular now as they were years ago. When people ask me about Cenk, and I've tried not to talk about him that much, I left there about 10 years ago, and I don't like talk, if I'm going to talk about somebody that I knew and was kind of friendly with and played basketball with, I'd prefer to say nice things. So I don't have that many nice things to say about him, but I will give him credit for one thing. He was early in on realizing what digital media was going to do to news. So Young Turks became very popular because he was first in, and first mover always has a huge
He told me
advantage.
He was the first podcaster, the first YouTuber. He said he was the first YouTuber when I spoke to him.
The first YouTuber? Well, that's
claimed to be the
true.
OG YouTuber.
Well, he's probably maybe the first doing a news program. That might be true. He's definitely not the first YouTuber, but he saw that, and I give him credit for that. That there's something there that is, if you see the uncharted territory and you see the world to conquer and you're first, like there's something to say about that. In terms of his politics and everything, I mean, he ushered in all of the everyone is racist and everyone is a bigot and every Republican is a sellout and they love war and white people are all of the horrible stuff that now we call woke that we're kind of getting out of. He was one of the prime movers of that. In some sense, I credit him for waking me up because I was on that show virtually every day for 2 years, and I'd started Rubin Report there. I saw the craziness. So people credit me for why I left the left or whatever. And it was like, well, part of the reason I left early, now everyone's leaving the left. It's very easy to leave the left, right? Rogan can now, the day before the election, support Trump, and it doesn't cost him anything. If anything, he gets credit for it. When I left the left, there was a huge, huge cost to it. I have no problem. I'm glad that I did it. I did what I thought was right.
When did you leave there? I
mean, I left the Young Turks in, I think it was in February of 2015. And then the video that called Why I Left the Left that I did with PragerU came out about a year after that. And interestingly, the first year of sort of my new updated Rubin Report post Young Turks, I still considered myself on the left. But what happened was I could only sit down with right wingers, because once I started saying, we didn't even call it woke yet, but once I started saying, boy, identity politics is bad, or, this neo-racism thing, or what's really going on with state, and starting to think about taxes a little bit, just thinking about things a little bit differently, nobody on the left would talk to me. And then suddenly I was like, all right, well, I will talk to this scary Ben Shapiro, who I'm told is so evil. And then we have an hour-and-a-half conversation. We disagree on a whole bunch of stuff, from abortion to death penalty and a bunch more. But I'm like, oh, he's a nice enough guy, and we'll continue that conversation. And then the exact same thing happens with Dennis Prager. The exact same thing happens with Larry Elder. The exact same thing happens with Glenn Beck. So all of these people who I had major disagreements with at the time, I would say our disagreements have shrunk because I have shifted a little bit for sure. And I think in some ways, some of the people on the right have moderated when it comes to some of the social stuff. The left was just a barren wasteland because they decided to cancel and crush and destroy everybody. It was
anti-pluralist.
So although I don't know about the story, completely anti-pluralist. So although I don't know about the specifics of the story that you just mentioned, he deserves every bit of tumult that he might be getting, because he ushered this in, and now he's pretending he had nothing to do with it. Again, if your evolution is honest, that's a beautiful thing. We all learn and change. That's the point of being a human. That's what separates us from the animals. We have a mind, but if your evolution is, I fought really hard and called Trump and all his supporters Nazis and he's Hitler and all of those things, and then, the election doesn't go the way you want, so I've evolved because the culture has changed and I didn't have anything to do with that whole thing. You got to be real. Your antennas better go up around someone like that, because guess what? They will evolve again to take you out the second it is expedient.
Sorry to be sort of repeat myself,
no,
but
no.
you know, him doing Dr. Phil,
Yeah.
him and Gavin Newsom bringing on these right wingers, isn't that sort of an example of a change in the anti-pluralism? There's a sort of anti-pluralism. They realize that the anti-pluralism doesn't work.
Sure, but
that's what I mean earlier when I said that Newsom is showing some courage, because he's going against his tribe in that you actually can have conversations with people.
Right. So look, Newsom is getting hit by the left for doing this, right? So that to that extent, you could maybe argue that that's courage. Again, with someone like Newsom and someone like Cenk, I would argue that the authenticity is so. It is so deeply inauthentic that I don't give that any credit. That to me is survival. So that's not bravery. That's pure, oh, I have a gig and I'm trying to stay popular and I'm trying to make money and something else. You show me somebody, and I love talking to these people. You show me a teacher that 3 years ago was in a classroom and was like, there's a difference between boys and girls, that got fired and then suddenly started talking about it and had to pay a real price. That's bravery. That's courage. Yeah. You show, I should make a point here, because I guess to some extent someone might be watching this going, well, wait a minute, doesn't Dave want to talk to people who think differently? Of course I do. I would prefer to. It's become very hard to talk to these lefties because they've become so hysterical. But if you find me, and I just don't think it's those two that you've mentioned, you show me someone who's more on the left, but authentically on the left. I might argue that they have the wrong idea. So they're a socialist, let's say, or a communist. But if they authentically believe that stuff and they want to talk and debate about that, I'll do that all day long. I'm most likely not inviting them to my house to do it. We'll do it on Skype or in a third location.
Is there anyone on the left, this is a bit of a tangent, that you actually respect?
Is there anyone on the left now that I respect?
Bernie?
No, I don't respect Bernie. To be an 82-year-old millionaire with 3 houses, who has for 50 public years of life never passed a serious piece of legislation, who has pushed the ideas of socialism, who has helped young people think that envy and greed and doing and taking from others to do what you want with their money is good. I don't give him credit. But I would say this: Bernie seems to be a true believer. You know what I mean? Like, I believe Bernie thinks that is the good stuff. Now, he's, again, become a millionaire with a government job with 3 houses while doing it. But I believe he is authentic in what he is doing. You could take his new sidekick, AOC, and look at her. And to me, it's a much more cynical version. I think she would abandon all of those ideas the second she thinks the gravy train is over. Is there anyone right as the left stands right now?
Yeah.
Not really, because... Well, first off, if you can think of some, I would love to chat with them. But I would say all of the old school liberals, and I know for you guys across the pond, you can still say liberal and it means the true essence of classically liberal, where we say liberal in America and everyone, it basically means progressive, which I hate. I mean, my whole first book was a defense of liberalism. It's not that I don't believe those things, but I can't walk around and say I'm a liberal anymore, because for the American mind, it just doesn't make sense. Sure. But when I speak in Europe, I am able to say that, and they understand, oh, there is a slight distinction between classically liberal and conservative, but I can't, in America, it's just they've just too convoluted those terms.
What about someone like Dean Phillips? He was he's someone who's been on Jordan Peterson's podcast and wanted to run.
No, so okay, so you could take,
he was ostracized for doing so.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you could take, okay, so first you'd have like somebody like Tulsi or Bobby Kennedy, who were Democrats literally 2 years ago, both ran for president as Democrats. Let's say they were moderate classical liberal types. They, in essence, are both Republicans now. I don't know that Bobby actually has said it, but he works for Trump. Let's say they're moderate conservatives. They're on the more liberal wing of the Republican Party, something like that. So then I guess you could take someone like a Dean Phillips, someone like Andrew Yang, I don't know, something like
Fetterman?
that. Fetterman. Okay, so Fetterman at least is popular in politics, so maybe he's the best example. What I would say about them is I think they don't really know why they're Democrats anymore, other than it means to them that they're not Republicans. So Fetterman, who does to his credit, take positions all over the board, right? So he really does. He goes against his own party and will stand with the Republicans, and then a minute later will vote some weird thing on girls and boys sports. So he's all over the place. I don't know what that says about his mind or how clear his thinking is or what level of brain damage he may or may not have. Did you ever see the movie Awakenings with
No.
Robert De Niro and Robin Williams? It's a movie about a guy who basically is in a coma. It's De Niro, and Robin Williams gives him this experimental drug. He comes back to life. It's based on a true story about a hospital, I think, in Queens. He turns on again, and for like a month, he's back, and he thinks clearly, and he's talking about the meaning of life and what we all forget because we just are walking around living. And then slowly it starts degrading again. And I think we're in some version of that with Fetterman. He's very good on things, and then he starts like degrading again. But all of that to say, I would say they just don't know, like someone like Phillips, I don't know all of his positions, but like you're probably just a moderate Republican. If the choice right now is you can be in a wide tent kind of Trump freedom movement, and we're trying to get the government off your back, and we're trying to expose fraud, we're trying to scale back the wars. A lot of these things were things the Democrats used to be for. We don't really care about the social issues as much anymore. Abortion's been kicked back to the states. I don't know one Republican that's upset in a public manner about gay marriage, let's say. You should be a Republican. I think they just say they're Democrats because it's like they've spent so much of their lives hating Republicans that to do that would be too much of a hit.
Well, I'd like to ask about the Republicans, but maybe we come back to later because there's what's going on the right is also very interesting right now. But before moving on from the left of media, do you think that Bill Maher might be the Joe Rogan of the left? Because there's a lot of chat like we can find the Joe Rogan of the left.
Yeah.
That seems to be, or at least maybe that's the right making fun of the left is what they're trying to do. But he is doing that, and you've done his show.
Yeah.
Is it called Clubhouse or
Club Random is a podcast, and then I've done Real Time as well. Look, and Bill and I have become good friends. I talk about Bill on my show all the time, in the most honest way possible, in that we now are friends, but I also hit him when it's appropriate, I think, and I credit him where credit is due, that he is trying, as he always says, I didn't change, they changed. By the way, Ronald Reagan used to say that. Ronald Reagan, when he was a Democrat most of his life and then became a Republican before he was governor of California, said, I didn't leave the Democrat Party left me. It's ironic. Reagan was saying that as he was becoming a Republican almost 50 years ago. And Bill Maher is saying the same thing now, but he's just staying, basically within the party. Look, Bill, who I think this very week is going to meet Trump at the Oval Office. I don't know that they're doing a public interview or anything. Bill is a true liberal. Bill is a liberal in every, I would say, positive sense of the word liberal. I think what he's missing in this is that you actually kind of need a conservative to defend liberal values. Liberals are unable to defend liberalism. It's sort of like walking around the West Village. You walk around the West Village and you see all these purple-haired, wafy, asexual guys, and they're probably all Democrats or progressives. And it's like, who's going to defend the country that's going to make sure that you can walk around with a pocketbook and purple hair and live however you want to live, which I am completely fine with them living however they want to live. It's not the liberals who are going to defend that. It's the scary Republicans who are going to stop the barbarians at the gate. And I think that's the disconnect. So liberals, it's why people call them limousine liberals. Liberals also from a certain economic perspective. If you're a liberal and you're like kind of upper middle class, well, you don't live in the place where all hell's breaking loose. And you don't have to pay the price for that because you live in a gated community in Beverly Hills or something else. Eventually it does get to you, but at that point it's a little late and you still get beheaded.
Yeah, well, where I live in London, in North London, we don't have limousine liberals, we have cocaine communists. And Lamborghini laboristas.
Yeah, and what would we call the jihadists? The jolly jihadists? How about that? Yeah.
So let's talk about what's going on in the media right. So there was what happened before the election. I don't know if we need to really go over it. You kind of mentioned that Rogan endorsed Trump. Yeah. Bernie Bro endorsing Trump, and everyone kind of is aware of what happened. But what's happened since, to me, is, and actually, to be honest, this was happening before, but I was maybe not taking it as seriously as I now am.
Yeah.
Which is that those on the right of, I don't know if I can say
right, the right-left thing.
It's very confusing, but let's say those who are maybe more Trump sympathetic.
Yeah.
Or anti-progressive, perhaps. whatever the coalition might be, there's a faction of it, and I would say a big faction, which are openly toying with conspiracies. Some conspiracies are somewhat fun. If you're talking about the pyramids having underground cities or various interpretations of the moon landing, there's a fun side to it. And to some extent, I'm sure Bobby Kennedy wouldn't say it's fun, but the JFK stuff, there's something fun about it in a weird way, toying about with those conspiracies. I know there's also a not very fun side of that as well. I don't mean to belittle that. But there's a side of it that I really don't like, which has been a character like Darryl Cooper, who says he's not a historian, but kind of acts like a historian, going on Rogan, going on Tucker Carlson. And as far as I'm concerned, is saying things like Churchill was the real villain of World War II, and toying with what I've listened to it, and I would be happy to say, well, not happy, rather displeased to say that this is Nazi apologia and Hitler revisionism. That's my interpretation. Maybe you have a different one. And other members are explicitly anti-Semitic. We see blood libel. We see the Groyper movement with people being just brazenly anti-Semitic. And I find that really, and to some extent, I could ignore it when it's on the very fringe. But seeing it go on to Tucker Carlson, and he's in and out of the White House, seeing go on Rogan, and I love the Rogan show. Like, for me, it's very concerning that this is happening on the right, and I think I don't know where it's going to go, but I wondered if you had an impression.
There's a whole bunch of things to discuss here. First, part of everything that's happening in general in culture and in the world right now is the nature of the internet. It's put aside politics for a second, put aside ancient hatreds or anything else. The way the internet operates, the way social media operates, is we're always going to the fringe of the fringe of the fringe. That's just where energy is. That's where trolling is. That's where the bot farms are. That might be where some layer of, foreign government interference. But even putting that aside, like the just crazy, like sort of Machiavellian lunacy of the internet, the brain rot of the internet. So it's like, if you can say something crazy, if you can say something that sounds like, oh, I couldn't say that yesterday and now I can say it here, and all those things, the internet just kind of heads in that direction. Years ago, Jordan Peterson would go to D.C. and he would ask all of these Democrat Congress people and senators, when does the left go too far? And he could never get anyone to respond to that. They would never say when. And I think that's a good parable for what's happening to the internet. We went from having way too controlled gatekeepers. The Overton window was obviously way too controlled. And the media has lied about so many things, which we could do the laundry list of just in the last couple of years, whether it was COVID or the Russia hoax or very fine people on both sides or Jesse Smollett was lynched. We can do that whole list. That they kept it so tight. They lied in front of our faces. Then we had the internet to see some truth. And then all of the people basically who live online, and you have to, like, you and I aren't that old, but like there are generations now that are growing up online, and there's just like this thing that's happening that is related to energy online. So you say something crazy and it's going to work. You are going to get clicks. I'm going to say the thing that nobody can say. And then you say it, and then suddenly you get a lot of clicks and you get a lot of money. And I can't even say it. And yet you're still saying it and you're still here and you're making money and clicks.
They get a hell of a lot of clicks, by the way.
They get a hell of a lot of clicks.
That's what's so concerning.
So one part of this, I think, is purely having nothing to do with anti-Semitism or America or anything else. It's just the nature of psychology as it unfolds on X and on Twitter and TikTok and everything else. That's one part. To some of the specifics that you said there, I think it actually was Tucker that said the line about Winston Churchill, wasn't it?
Is that right?
On the podcast. So I think Tucker, when they were discussing World War II, Tucker's argument, and I think I'm getting this right, and I'm sure people will fact check me. Tucker's argument was, hey, well, look what happened now to the UK. That's an argument you're sympathetic to, right? Like that the UK is really banged up. I just saw you in London not too long ago. And,
yes, but it's ridiculous to say that that's Churchill.
Right. So that's the difference.
That's absurd.
He made what I think was a fairly ridiculous argument that on the surface level kind of sounded right. The argument was sort of basically like this. It was, well, okay, we won World War II, but look what happened. So can you really argue we won? That argument does not work for me at all. Putting aside what you think, if that had anything to do with supporting Hitler or anything else, it's just nonsensical. The winning of the World War II, thank God we won World War II, and we did have a good, what I would say was broadly liberal order in the Western world that freed more people and led to more success and crushed poverty and all of these things and led to strong nation states for 70 plus years. A lot of that is fraying right now, partly because of the liberals. But you can't blame the guy who did the right thing in the mid 1930s, who did the right thing and stopped the true bad guys, Hitler, who obviously was the true bad guy. And I saw some people saying, well, Hitler never, or I think Daryl said something like Hitler wasn't giving speeches about how much he hated the Jews until later on, and that got debunked pretty quickly. Hitler
was making anti-Semitic speeches from as early as 1920. He did a 2-hour speech in 1920 saying the title was "Why We Are Anti-Semitic," and he got interrupted 50 odd times, but with cheers. Not only that, he said to take Daryl Cooper said to take the Mein Kampf with a pinch of salt. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, this is ridiculous. Like that's what I'm very upset about.
So look again on the Tucker point to make the argument that Churchill was bad because you don't like what's happening in London today. It just strikes me as like completely ridiculous. Like, we won World War II. Thank God we won World War II. It was obviously the U.S. had something to do with it, but it was in large part because Winston Churchill decided not to play the game that Neville Chamberlain was playing. Okay, fine. As it pertains to some of this other stuff, I think something that's happening right now that people can't quite grasp is that because we've been lied to about so many things and everyone is starting to go off into their own little corners, right? What happens is everyone becomes a conspiracy theorist to some degree. That can only operate for so long in a functional society. And I think what history has proven is at the end of the conspiracy theory road, that blaming the Jews is like breaking the glass to get the fire extinguisher at the last minute. It's the thing that's at the end of the road. Like when there's nothing left, it's just like, it's the Jews. So like when the JFK thing came out, there was nothing in there that blamed Israel or Jews or anything else. But I saw an awful lot of people who really wanted it to be the Jews being like, this proves it was redacted. This proves it was the Jews because it doesn't say it was the Jews. Or this proves it was the Mossad. I don't know what happened. And I didn't read all 80,000 pages. Is it possible that LBJ was coordinating with the CIA and there was something where it was mafia? Any of those things are possible. But in almost every conspiracy theory, it ends with the Jews because the Jews are the other. The Jews are the other for thousands of years that are still here. There are a lot of others that don't exist anymore. There are a lot of civilizations that don't exist. So people don't know exactly what to do with that. Wait a minute. There's this group that's very small that somehow succeeds, that has largely maintained cultural traditions and their religion and their history and all of these things. And they've succeeded despite being the minority in these other countries. And the thing is, I see these people that are like, well, the Jews have been kicked out of 140 countries or something. And it's like, that's not a condemnation of the Jews. That's the condemnation of how majorities treat minorities. The Jews are just the minority that survived it. So I think a lot of this is just that these people are not thinking about these things clearly and cleanly. And we got to clean some of that up.
We got to clean some of that up. So how do we clean some of that up?
Well, I think the truth is the best way to do it. So, I mean, when I've largely tried to stay out of the broader fight of this online, but I do fight for Israel because I think it is a just fight, and I think it's a just and moral and historically correct fight to have. So when I've got into it about Israel online, usually what my argument, I can make the historical argument that no state of Palestine ever existed and that the Jews, where do you think Jesus of Nazareth came from and why are the Judean hills, everyone that hates Israel, that only says that they're anti-Zionist, they will wish their friends happy Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the story of the Jews of Judea, the Maccabees, defending the Judean hills, which unfortunately we now call West Bank, but it was never called the West Bank. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River, which really only started in the 60s to be called that. So you're literally Rashida Tlaib. She does it every year. She wishes Jews a happy Hanukkah. She doesn't want any Jews to live there now, but she's wishing them a happy holidays for your story that you're retelling generation after generation for thousands of years. So I think if you tell the story honestly, and if people are willing to have an honest conversation, I think the truth does win over time. The problem, though, is when you take that and then you connect it when you take a calm, rational truth and then you try to play it out in the game that I just laid out of how the energy of the internet works, it doesn't work. So so Ben Shapiro is a good example of this. If Ben says anything, Ben is like Avatar for Jew, right? So if Ben says anything, he just gets mobbed online by all these people. And you look at his Twitter mentions and everyone's saying the most awful things to him and pictures of gas chambers and horrible things and all of this stuff. And it's like, if he says something true, well, okay, some people star it or like it or retweet it, but they don't get in the comments and blah, blah, blah. So the way the game is constructed in terms of social media lends itself to more craziness. That's why, as concerned as I am about genuine Jew hatred, and as concerned I would be about hating anyone just based on their immutable characteristics or whatever, there's a gamesmanship that's happening here that I think if we can kind of find a more of an antidote to that, I think some of the other stuff will go away. I'll also say, and then I'll stop talking, I think the other way you stop this stuff is success in America. One of the real disappointments for me about this thing that's going on the right should be celebrating like never before. We got the president we want. His cabinet is a bunch of absolute all-stars. You got everybody. You got Bobby. You got Tulsi. Hegseth is freaking amazing. Rubio's doing a great job. They're uncovering the craziest stuff through DOGE, which I think we're going to talk about. There's so much to celebrate on the right. So on my show every day, we're celebrating what's happening on the right. And then I mock the left, whatever they're doing on The View and whatever. So when some of these shows, with all of the goodness that's happening right now, if you're doing shows every day and you're like, and here's the new thing the Jews did, it's like, okay, not only is that actually largely irrelevant, but why don't you focus on what's good? You guys got Trump back, the guy that they tried to jail, that they almost killed. We have everything we want right now to repurpose America into something great. And that might tell you more about them than anything else, actually, because maybe that's not what they're interested in.
So I appreciate why you might want to be celebrating. Yeah. And, I would have a bias that there's much I would be celebrating too. But it seems to me, if you look at the failures of the left, part of it was their puritanical nature and their not being okay with criticism of certain people or outright ostracism of others. Yeah. What concerns me is that people like Tucker are so powerful that people are nervous to really critique them because, let's say, if they have a name, they stand to lose something, especially if they work in media or even in politics. Really, Tucker's such a huge figure. So what I'm concerned about is that these ideas aren't properly critiqued, like they're not properly addressed. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but do you think that they are being properly challenged?
Look, it's one of those games, again, because of the nature of the internet, where these things are happening online, and how much energy do you want to give them even by addressing them? But you're making a good point, too, which is it is possible if the good liberals of 2014 had stood up and said, boy, you crazy progressives who think boys are girls and that America's fundamentally evil and that capitalism is bad, you guys have to stay in the children's room. Maybe this all wouldn't have happened. Largely, this thing that you're talking about on the right is a complete reaction to the hysteria of the left. You know what I mean? It was white young men were told they were evil. They obviously are not evil. That doesn't make you evil in and of yourself. And now they're just having a reaction to that. Jordan Peterson, by the way, warned about that on Rogan about 10 years ago. He said, man, if you think it's a great clip and Jordan can say it, he can do it in a way that no one else can do. But he said basically, if you think what's going on with the crazies on the left is bad, wait till you see what the reaction on the right will be. And that's what you're trying to guard from. Yes. That's obviously what we're discussing here. Look, I would say this. I would have no problem going on Tucker's show. I used to go on a show on Fox. He hasn't called me. I think I was one of the people that inspired Tucker to go independent. He told me that. He wrote it in my book. He told me on my show live. He goes after Ben Shapiro a lot, and I think it's fairly obvious why, but he won't have been on the show. I think he should have been on the show. He should have those things.
What is obvious?
Well, I think Ben is a great debater, and Ben would probably disassemble a lot of the stuff that you're talking about there. So I think it's fairly obvious why he's not doing that. I think Douglas Murray is doing an absolutely amazing job of pushing back against some of this stuff.
Well, Jordan actually was pushing back against it he put his name to this document about Christ is King. So Christ is King is a term that's been used on the internet, not just by Christians to signal they're Christian, but it seems to have gone much further than that. And this particular document that Jordan put his name to, shows how it's grown exponentially, and it seems to be targeted at Jews. Now, I don't know where you land on that, whether you agree with that report, whether you think it's fair to say that it's an anti-Semitic, it's turned into an anti-Semitic slogan.
Of course, Christ is king in and of itself. Of course, is an anti-Semitic, and everyone should celebrate their Lord and Savior however they see fit. What the report was about and what was happening online was, I never saw one Jewish person or anyone else be upset by Christ is king. What happened was, shortly after October 7th, when suddenly this crazy anti-Jew stuff was bubbling up, there was a certain set of people online, I guess you could call it the Groyper crew or whatever it is, that was saying awful things about Israel and Jews and all these lies, and then writing Christ is king at the end. And Jordan's argument, and I think he's making a very deep, important argument here, is that is actually anti-Christ and it's blasphemy. Actually, if you are a believer, I'm not Christian, so I'm not purporting to take that position. But Jordan's position is, using the Lord's name in vain is a sin if you are a believer. So to say Christ is king, to say I believe that Christ is the Lord and Savior and the Son of God, and that is what I believe forthrightly, and I live my life in accordance, of course is a wonderful thing, sure, when that's honest. But if you're using it as a cudgel to smack over somebody by your own purported beliefs, you are actually being blasphemous. That's the point. And I think he really did expose that really was what a lot of people were doing. And again, I think that also is connected to the internet part. So it's connected to the way the internet works. So this thing starts happening. Okay, so it's post October 7th. Now they start hating Jews. They get this Christ is king thing going. And then one person's like, see what happened? Someone got upset when I said that. And then it starts becoming cool to do. And then all of these anonymous accounts. You know how much credit I give Elon for so much. The guy's been unbelievable. I don't know that he has a bigger supporter than me in terms of what this man has tried to do on Earth. One mistake that I think he made with X, and I will gladly talk to him about this one day, is that when he made likes anonymous, remember in the old, even just a year ago, if you clicked like on something, someone could go to your profile and see what they liked. Mm-hmm. When he made likes anonymous, that was in some sense, it was a way of gaming the system to increase crazy behavior, because then you could just like anything. And I'm not saying that you need to see someone's likes to offer accountability, but people they control themselves in a more honest manner when there's a little bit of skin in the game. And even for anonymous accounts, if your likes were visible, you might control yourself a little bit more. I'm not against anonymity.
I guess the counter argument to that would be like voting in a natural election, which is anonymous. It's a secret ballot.
Sure, but he also has bookmarks. They have bookmarks. So bookmarks are totally for you.
But you might want to book something without liking it. I bookmark things because I want to have a record of what's going on. A like is an endorsement of sorts.
Right.
So in a way, like a natural election, you wouldn't want to make elections public now, who you vote
for, right?
So
well, I think there's a difference between an election, obviously, and I know you're not making that argument, but there's a difference between an election and social media, but also the like thing, I think. The bigger problem is we don't know how much of this is just gamed in general. Forget all the kind of narcissistic trolls out there. If someone puts up something and it's completely insane and you look at it and you're like, boy, that is 80,000 likes. You're like, oh my God, an awful lot of we have no idea. Are those bots? Are those real people? Are those trolls? Was that all coordinated on Reddit or 4chan? And yet it creates an optics around everything that's hard to understand. And I think that's partly what's going on here.
I see. The Christ is king thing, just one point, is whether or not it's anti-Semitic. One thing I absolutely agree with you is that, and I say this as a Christian, is that if you make a political statement and then write Christ is king underneath, that is absolutely an abuse of
well, I think that's what Jordan's point was, especially if you're using it against somebody or
I think
or a
I've
group
seen
of
some people
people
saying like Bridget Macron is actually a man, Christ is king. I mean,
right.
That is so, I mean, that is absolutely it's almost beyond pastiche.
So that's where I think the argument would be that would be blasphemy under their own. Or it would be a false idol in essence at that point. If you say I live my life as a Christian and I love my wife and we go to church and I want to create a wonderful family and live within the guidelines of the church and everything else, Christ is king. Literally nobody is gonna have a problem with that. And then an awful lot of Jews will click like on that and say, oh, boy, that's pretty nice, you know? But if you do it what you just laid out. So if Macron is a man, or the Jews or whatever, bacon matzah with blood or whatever, and then you write Christ King, it's like, that's not really what the thing was about.
Yeah, quite.
So, yeah.
If I can carry on hurtling us through our
I don't know. We'll
review
see.
of the
We'll see.
media landscape in America post-election. I noted actually just before you arrived that I saw the White House. What's her name? These press secretary something Leavitt.
Caroline Leavitt.
Caroline Leavitt,
Yeah.
has announced the Podcasters Row.
Yes. I was invited to be there today, but I'm here with you. No joke.
Oh, really?
No joke.
They couldn't.
I was invited
persuade
to
you?
the White House. I said,
What do you know about
Winston
it?
makes a cup of coffee, and I'm coming. Yeah.
What intel do you have about Podcasters Row? Is it?
They're doing I think they're going to do this every couple of weeks, where they'll bring in all sorts of people. I'm sure you'll be invited at some
that would be
point.
exciting.
And look, that just goes to where we started this conversation, with just the complete changing of the landscape. For way too long, the three major networks, and then the three cable news channels, and then the print stuff like Washington Post and New York Times, they just had too much control. And the thing is, we could have dealt with a lot of lies, but they decided to lie about everything. And once they decided to lie about everything, and we had to whatever extent the internet was free, we started to see it. They just don't deserve the credit anymore. So, when I see someone and in their byline it's Washington Post, I pretty much think they're a liar.
Yeah.
They're probably not always a liar, but they're pretty much a liar. If you were to look at I don't know how many times I've been mentioned in the New York Times, maybe a dozen times, I can probably point out to you at least a dozen factual errors in those articles. So probably a 1-to-1 on that. That's just the way it's been done forever over there. So I think what the administration is realizing is, boy, Trump went on Rogan right before. It was pretty big. He went on he's been on my show. He went on all these podcasts, and the media is different. And why should we just take questions from Washington Post and New York Times? Like, we shouldn't. And I think it's good.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to try and get myself down there. The big thing that's in the news right now, which is, I guess, kind of exciting, but you mentioned DOGE. This is a DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency subcommittee, ran by Marjorie Taylor Green, the Congresswoman, which is coming after the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, who have just been awarded a $500 million appropriation for the fiscal year 2027. I'm not sure quite why it's worked out. It's something to do with their 2-year funding cycle. But a hell of a lot of money in the age of Elon Musk's big cleanup, which, of course, you've been celebrating on your show, as have I on mine. So there's my bias on the table. But it's worth going into this because the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, set up under the 1967 Public Broadcasters Act, funds to great expense NPR and PBS. And you'll understand this better than I do because this is not my country. But they're not state broadcasters, but they're public radio. And if these broadcasters are unbelievably biased in a direction. So NPR, for example, this is something that was revealed by Uri Berliner, who I interviewed a year or so ago. They have 87 members on their editorial board are registered Democrats and 0 are Republicans. Katherine Maher, who was appointed CEO, if not last year, the end of the year before, she had previously said truth is a distraction from getting things done. She'd also said the number one challenge to whatever she was trying to achieve was the First Amendment. Really staggering to hear an American say that. So I kind of wanted to get your take of what's going on, whether this is something to be excited. How do I
defund them? How
Defund
about
them?
that? Defund them completely, not
Privatize them? Destroy them?
Doesn't matter. Defund them, and then if they have any quality programming, it will end up somewhere else. I don't know if you've heard of this thing, but there's the internet now, and people can put video on it. It's rather incredible, and you can do it pretty cheap. You can actually do it in your apartment with a couple lights and a table, and it's pretty good. And you can make great content that's valuable and hopefully true and entertaining and everything else. They should not be putting aside political bias. I think you could make the argument that even if they were putting out pretty good programming, like fairly decent programming, they still should get nothing. Why should the state be funding programming? Maybe you could argue the state should fund the arts to some extent, and I often make the argument on my show that the state should fund science for the sake of science, even though some libertarians, let's say, don't want that. But they should not. I think is Sesame Street still on PBS? Like, Oscar the Grouch will find somewhere to live besides that garbage can. And if he doesn't, well, then they probably shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So to whatever, unless private people, I guess you could have a public channel, meaning it's just like put on the cable systems. And if it wants to be funded by private people, which plenty of people fund these things, right? That's how you get the PBS tote bag that many people around New York City used to walk around with.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone anymore. They just have kefias and whatever. But like they just they carry their groceries in kefias. It used to be a PBS bag. But that would be fine. Meaning if you created just a space, meaning it was just a slot that was on the cable broadcast, that was the public part, and then it was privately funded, I could get on board that. But I see there's just no purpose for it anymore. It's just...
I'm trying to think of a counter example here, but it's hard because in Britain we have the BBC and we have regulators. They have failed so dramatically.
Yeah.
So the idea of bringing in some sort of regulator, I just don't think it works. And what actually has worked is more competition. So with the BBC, there's the upstart channel, GB News, although definitely on the right.
Yeah.
Although they have
by default, but that's the thing. It's default on the right because it had to be the counter thing. It's why, as you said earlier, the only reason the right podcast space is thriving is because it's a counter to all of the other lunacy.
Let me just, assuming that it's very hard to create any sort of channel that's, let's say, publicly funded that is fair and balanced, because there's always going to be some bias. And I think this ties in with earlier part of our conversation where you're talking about the internet and everything goes to extremes. And if you talk about our shows, like anyone who watches my shows knows my biases. Yeah. And I think you've been pretty open. You certainly privately, you've been open about your biases.
But that's what people appreciate. You know what I mean? Like, I don't pretend to be a journalist. I'm just telling you what I think. All right. If you like it, great. If you don't, that's okay.
But then isn't there a danger that just every show becomes completely biased, and there's no attempt,
of course,
anymore at being as balanced as possible?
There is a dangerous, but I don't think the answer to that danger is that the state should then fund programming, because the state doesn't do much well, as we're finding out.
What is the solution then?
The solution, I think, is that humans always find a way to build a better mousetrap, and I believe in the human mind, and I believe in ingenuity. So I would hope that and I also believe that the truth does win eventually. I think that that's what the most human story that there is. David beats Goliath for a reason. There's a reason that story resonates with people. It's actually true. The little guy can beat the big guy. Doesn't always beat the big guy, but can beat the big guy. It's why actually biblical stories still matter. It's why we translate the world into, why does the story of, it's not really my thing, but like, why does Harry Potter like work for people? Because the story is correct. The hero's journey is correct, right? I'm more of a sci-fi guy, so I would rather do like a Matrix version of that, or the original Star Wars, which was the perfect hero's journey. There are things that are actually true things that cannot change. So even if we all end up, and you're right, we might be on the precipice of this, where everything's about, the mainstream is so untrusted that things will break off into such crazy venues, and it will have all of the stuff that we're both concerned about on this side, and it'll have all of the stuff that we're both concerned about on this side, and then there'll be people in the middle trying to figure out things and everything else. Eventually it will come around. I really believe that, because the answer isn't, the state should just give $1 billion to a bunch of people. Let's put it this way. If Trump tomorrow was like, you know what, we'll keep PBS and we'll keep whatever the other one was. What was the other one? Not PBS. And there's PBS.
PBS, NPR.
And NPR. We'll keep them both. And I'm going to give them $1 billion, but I've tasked them with putting out pro-America content. Now, would I like pro-America content? Would that be nice if there was pro-America content that sold our true history and capitalism and all of those things, and an honest assessment of our 248 years? Well, that would be great. But the government shouldn't be they shouldn't be taking your money to do that if there's a market for it. And I do think there's a market for it, actually. There is a market for pro-America things. There is a market for things that are honest and true and all of those things. We've seen that the woke market doesn't work. That's largely why the corporations are leaving. So it's really about, I don't know, it's a little bit of supply and demand. And it's also, do you trust that some system, if you give it enough money, is going to give enough good crumbs back to you? And I'm not sure that that's true anymore.
I hope you're right. At the moment, it just seems to me we're increasingly siloed.
Yeah, I just don't know what the alternative is. I'm not telling you, look, there could be a lot of pain points along the way. Like if we keep fraying off, how will anyone know what's true, right? Like I do the best I can on my show every day to say what's true without hiding my biases, right? I've never once knowingly lied on my show to my audience. I've definitely got things wrong. I've gotten things wrong politically. I've backed candidates that lost. I backed DeSantis in the primary. I did what I thought was right. Chips fall where they may. I'm thrilled that Trump's president. But I've never knowingly lied, but that does not, but I obviously have my biases. I think you want to talk about the signal thing. Like I would be going way harder. This is just the truth. And I said it.
Let's just, what is the signal thing then? So this is, it's just been revealed. You spoke about this on Piers Morgan, that a bunch of, there was a signal chat and the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, was invited onto the,
seemingly accidentally by NSC's Mike Waltz.
And included
that's
in the
what
chat,
we're told at the moment.
Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense,
Tulsi,
Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's a laundry list.
It's a sort of it's described to me as, and I think it is public. You see, there's sort of emoji-laden chat about how they're going to, the specifics on how they're going to attack the Houthis in Yemen. So this has been made public.
Yeah,
right. And so, well, it's how this all fits in. I wouldn't mind getting your take on this.
Sure.
First of all, it seems to me that this is a massive screw up. Like this is a problem, and
absolutely,
and
screw up problem. Yes,
I can't help but think of what happened with Hillary Clinton, because with the Hillary Clinton emails, what was it, 10,000, 30,000 emails on a private server
in her home,
and I think it was 110 were deemed by the CIA or the FBI or whatever as being classified information that shouldn't be made public. So it seems to me the problem is that they shouldn't have been using. To me, that they shouldn't have been using Signal in the first place. Forget about the Jeffrey Goldberg aspect. They shouldn't have been using Signal because that.
Well, there's a couple of things. So let's go to let's just do it from the easiest to the hardest.
Yeah.
So the easiest version of all of this, if what we are told right now is true, is that Mike Waltz accidentally put in Jeffrey Goldberg. He was trying to put in someone else with the same initials, JG, and he put him in. Now, first off, we've all done something like that. You've definitely texted a Dave trying to text me, and you text a different Dave. We've all done that, but that doesn't excuse it. So there's he's also in NSC, like this, a big security guy. You got to double check, and maybe it was one of his underlings that did it, but there's 100%, if what we are told now is true, if he put this guy in or someone put him in, Trump has to decide whether that's a fireable offense. It's a fucking massive security breach and gaffe on him. And Trump has to decide if that's a fireable offense. That's exactly what I said to Piers on that. As per using Signal, that's a little bit different because Signal, I don't know if you saw it, but a couple of days ago, James Ratcliffe, who's the head of CIA, he testified under oath that when he was coming in, this is now just a couple of weeks ago, he just took over, but when he was coming in, that they told him at the CIA that his computer and other devices were preloaded with Signal. So why would the CIA hand the CIA director and other officials their computers and devices that have Signal on it if they're not supposed to use Signal? So there is, it seems to me, and I've asked some lawyers about this, there's at least some debate as to whether they should use Signal. It sounds to me like they actually are allowed to use Signal. There's some question about whether maybe they could put classified information on Signal. I would also say that a little of this is the way technology is changing. Like, we all communicate on these things now.
Can I just, I think there's an important detail, which is that it was Signal with an automatic clear after 2 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. Yeah. And there is, I don't know what the rules are exactly, but there's something about you want to keep everything open or rather saved somehow so that if there's any information request, you can look back through the old emails and it's not deleted, right? Because it didn't Hillary delete a bunch of stuff. So
she bleach bit, what do they call it? Bleach bit the server? I mean,
right.
So, okay. So again, so whether they're supposed to use Signal or not, or whether they used it slightly inappropriately by deleting, putting that time stamp on it with the deletions, I think those things are all up for debate. But as far as I understand, none of that is illegal per se. There's a massive fuck up by Waltz, 100%. But as I said to Piers, the reason I'm not that, he kept saying, you should be intellectually honest here. And if this was the Biden administration, you'd be going crazy. And what I kept saying was, look, everything about the Biden administration was a scandal from top to bottom. Joe Biden had dementia. and we all knew it, and they pretended he didn't. Kamala Harris had a soft coup so that he couldn't run for president again. This is not excusing anything. But the point is that we had 4 years where literally everything was a scandal. We don't know that Joe Biden knew any of the executive orders he signed. Turns out most of them were done by AutoPen, and some of them he wasn't even in the White House when it was done. Do you think that those last few executive orders he signed on the day out, last day in office, that man with that muddled brain knew what he was signing? There's no way. So we went from a previous administration that not only was he unqualified, but hired unqualified people across the board. He hired Pete Buttigieg because he was gay. He knew nothing about transportation. Secretary Dick Levine, Rachel Levine was hired as the number 2 in health because he was a man his whole life who then put on a dress. So everything, we just went from everything was a scandal to now, yes, there was a massive fuck up. And Trump has to decide if he wants to take Waltz out for that. But if you actually read the contents of the Signal chat, which I did, it's a pretty thoughtful exchange of ideas. JD's talking about, I don't know if we can fully sell this to American people because maybe Europe should be a little more involved here. And they're actually having an honest debate about what's going on. By the way, it's not as if this chat was happening and then we bombed the Houthis and no one knew it was coming. We were already bombing the Houthis.
Mm-hmm.
So, and nobody got killed or anything else. So I do think you have to look at it within a little bit of context. But just to be 100% clear, because Piers was really going at me on this, if this exact same thing was happening with the Biden administration, I would be angrier than I am now. What we're seeing is competent people and somebody made a mistake. What we saw before was incompetent people across the board, and we saw horrific withdrawal from Afghanistan and a series of other things. So I am granting them a little bit more of a leash here, and someone could say that's hypocritic.
If Piers asked you about it in the context, and to be fair, I asked you in the context because I brought up Hillary and her emails, and we can do a sort of
you can always
contrast
do
and
that,
compare, and it is great. But at the end of the day, they're out of the question. Biden's old news. Well, he's not old news, unfortunately, but he's certainly old. And but the fact is, as you happily say, you openly say, this was a problem, and it was a cock up. And so then the question is it? Do you think it's a cock up, but it's one mistake, leave it, like a slap on the wrist?
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, it's as I said to Piers, it's up to Trump to decide, do you think that this guy who you brought in to be one of your top security advisors, if he's the one that literally brought the guy into the chat accidentally, or he had one of his guys set up the chat, right? Because maybe he's a boomer. Maybe he doesn't even know how to set up a Signal chat. Maybe he had one of his guys do it. Do you think, and then there's all this fallout, is that a fireable offense? Trump is the one that has to make that decision. Now, again, if this had all happened under Biden, I would be going harder because the entire thing was a fraud. But I think when you have an administration that has brought in so many good people, and there's so many good fruits of that happening right now, I think you grant them a little bit of grace. And yes, I'm saying that partly because they're my guys, but I also think it's empirically true that there are good things happening in this country and in this world because of these people. But again, that's why I would leave it on the doorstep of Trump. He's in charge right now. These people work for him, and it's his decision to make.
I want to talk about Piers. We almost went into this before we started recording, but his show is, and I actually...
Is this where you bring in 6 more people to start yelling over each other? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I did it I've done it a couple of times, and one thing that's amazing about his show is that it's got crazy good numbers and consistently good. I mean, regularly 6 figures and high 6 figures, and often past 1 million every single day. I mean, it's really staggering, and you know, it's an industry that even the best of the rest it's very volatile, the numbers at the best of times, so what he's created to me is incredibly impressive. And going back to right at the beginning of this conversation, he actually gets differing voices on the show. Now, as well as Cenk Uygur, who was on me, there was also a woman in Brooklyn who was so anti-Semitic that AOC had to distance herself from this woman because she was another one of these kefir girls. And
if AOC is distancing,
well, that's right. I did say that.
Lady.
I can't say it was a particularly constructive conversation, but at least Piers is bringing on different voices. And yes, it's a shouting match. Yeah. But it seems to me there's some value to that. You're a regular.
Yeah, no, I'm a regular. Look, Piers. First off, you come from the country that Piers comes from. There is something to be said about the British tabloid journalist. That is the world that Piers comes from. There is something to be said about somebody that knows how to be in a business for now. He's been in for probably 40 years, like a long, long time. So I give him full credit on knowing how to create controversy, knowing how to create a good program. He even when he takes both sides of things and you kind of know what he believes, he's a presenter and a television personality that knows how to do that. I've actually only met him once in person. I was with you later that night. This was just a couple of weeks ago. I've been on the show a million times, but it was the first time that twice actually. But I've only spent a few minutes with him, like literally like this face to face, and he's a lovely guy,
fella.
and
Lovely
he's
fella.
fun and funny, and he doesn't mind. I've poked at him on Twitter sometimes, and then he'll talk about it on the show. Like, so I like him as a human being, absolutely. I think that what's happening with the show, and again, he's very happy. We're talking about the show right now. That's the genius, right? What's interesting about the show is it's not exactly that it's a yelling fest, in that it's an equal yelling fest. And he's admitted this. I had him on my show and I asked him about this. I said, isn't it easier for you to get people on the right to come on and thoughtfully make an argument and a cogent way of thinking and be funny and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, now tell me how it is on the left. And he admitted begrudgingly, it is very hard to get anyone on the left that will make a competent, cogent argument and not attack the person, not start yelling, et cetera. So that's why he put Cenk on all the time. It's not because Cenk has any good ideas. It's because he's a bloviating, screaming ogre who's sweating and screaming and calling everyone racist. And that's good television. When I've gone on there, I've debated these socialists and lefties, and usually it devolves into personal attacks. And I'm not saying people on the right never do that, but you know this to be true at this point. Broadly speaking, people on the right know how to defend their beliefs. They know what they believe. They're a little less hysterical because their lives don't revolve around politics. And lefties aren't. That's why he had that Harry Sisson kid on a million times, that like 17-year-old Democrat. It wasn't because Harry was a great TV personality or was thoughtful or knew what he was saying or anything else. It was because he could not get lefties. Because when he does, or he has to go into like the full jihad crowd from your country, or like just like a crazy person like Cenk. So but maybe that asymmetry actually does make good television, because you can't argue with the numbers again. So I don't fault him for any of that. I think he's built something that really is working. I would love to know what Piers' true opinions are on things a little bit more than he allows for, because that's one of the things that I see people frustrated with him a lot, because he kind of does take every position on everything. COVID, Middle East, Russia, Ukraine. He does a little of that, but I would also say that as a television presenter from a certain period of time that's been in the game forever, that is also a little bit of the magic of his longevity, whether you like it or not.
Any qualms, and this is something I can't do. There's some people I do consider beyond the pale.
Yeah.
And
no, me too.
I do think there's some sort of editorial. It's not to say I wouldn't have people I disagree with me on the show, but there are some people I'm like, I don't want to give. Yeah. I don't want to, and he doesn't seem to have any problem. And he's had some of these anti-Semites that I've alluded to.
No, he's had real people like just ranting and raving about the Jews, and he offers like a little bit of pushback and not. And then look, the counter argument to that would be, okay, well, most people realize and can recognize that these people are either bigots or ridiculous or deflecting from their own inadequacies or something like that. Maybe that's not the right argument to make. I think that's why I prefer to be in the space that you and I are in, and with the, I would say, growing collection of people that are in our social circles and that do these kind of shows and that we have dinner with, that we all do kind of think different things about things. And like, I don't know your position on abortion. I actually don't know. There's almost nothing you could say to me, right? If you told me you were 100% pro-life, or if you told me you were 9 months okay with an abortion, I'd probably be a little more upset with you. But if you told me you're 100% pro-life, I'm not. I think probably around 10 weeks, and I think it should be left to the states and whatever. Do you think I'm not having dinner with you tonight? We should discuss that at dinner tonight. We're gonna have a great collection of people and really figure it out. But that's just one issue. I don't know your position on the death penalty. It wouldn't make or break our friendship. But that's what, again, on the right, people seem to be willing to do some of that. At
this moment in the time, the right is far more pluralist.
Yes, and that could change.
That could change, but I think the problems on the right we've already gone into in this conversation are the extremities of this conspiratorial stuff, which I'm very alarmed about. And again, not to sort of hammer old ground, but...
By the way, I hope you don't think I'm diminishing the concern about it. I definitely am concerned about it. What I was trying to lay out is that there's multiple layers of why this thing's happening. And I think if we think about it in a little bit more of like a layer cake way, like the pressures of the internet, the cult of personality, the breakdown of mainstream media, the opening of the Overton window, like if we think about it, even to the COVID backdrop where everyone was told they can't say anything, if you just take all of those things as the cake, I think it's a little bit of a better way to analyze the problem. And again, to be clear, I will gladly debate or have a conversation with Tucker on either show or several of these other people,
Yeah. Dave, we've had a wonderful conversation. I think we've kind of got the scope of everything in terms of the media, and that's kind of been the focus of this conversation.
I have nothing left to say about it. I have nothing left.
But I guess if I may end on a sort of more personal note, is seeing as you are this media tycoon yourself, what do you see going forward for yourself, and what's next for the Rubin Report? Like, what's your ambition? What would you, seeing as your team are in power, so to speak, if I can put it like that.
Last year, as you started with, like, I am kind of one of the OG guys. I'm not going to tell you, like, Jank, that I was the first YouTuber. I was not.
What year?
But I started the Rubin Report originally on the Young Turks in 2013. So he had started the Young Turks a few years before that. Then I kind of had my wake up around 2015 or so. That's when the show started gaining popularity more, when I started actually saying what I thought and was waking up very publicly and everything else. But after, basically 13 years doing this, last year was by far our biggest year. I think our numbers jumped 150%, and the year before was our biggest year, and the year before was our biggest year, and the year before was our biggest year. We had 800 million views on YouTube last year.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm saying we built something that's good. Yeah. I tell people what I think. We try to do it in a funnier way than I've been.
And it is we, by the way.
Phoenix, my producer over there.
You're lucky
look
to
at him.
find
He's
a
on his
talented
phone
fellow
right
like
now.
that.
He's obviously working right this very moment, typing away over there, smiling. He's very happy.
And I've met your team. There's a big team.
Yeah, and we've built something that's really great. I was one of the pioneers, I guess you could say, in going independent, and that's why I started Locals years ago, and then Locals merged with Rumble. And by Rumble being a place for free speech online, I think it actually made YouTube better, because then they suddenly had competition, and they realized they couldn't delete everybody and demonetize everybody and everything else. What I was most proud of last year, which will connect to the answer to your question, is that last year, because it was an election year, I was really focused on waking up these last liberals and saying, you can vote for Trump. Not because he's God, not because anything else, but if we're going to save this
country. He's just
country,
Imperial King.
He's just an orange calf. That we have to fix this thing, and we have to do this wide tent Republican thing. And I think I really believe I was an important piece of that I was working on Tulsi for years. I was working on Bobby for 2 years. When I had Bobby on Kennedy, when I had him on right when he announced, I said to him, we had never met before, and it was on Skype. We hadn't, had the face-to-face yet. I said, Mr. Kennedy, I don't know if you'll be a Republican by the end of this campaign, but I know you won't be a Democrat. And I reminded him of that a couple of times now that we've, become friendly and broke some bread together. And he lights up every time. And he's like, you did say that, you knew. And the only reason I knew was because it was the road that I had traveled. It's a road that I think in some way maybe you're traveling. It's a little bit different again because of the British perspective, but it's the road that so many people. So I was so proud that my show had a little something to do with the results of the election that I think genuinely saved the country. Because if it went the other way, we would be having a very, very different conversation right now about literally everything that we've spent this time talking about. So my goal really for going forward is
if I may, I mean, you talk there like an activist, not like a journalist or a YouTuber, right?
So, well, I don't consider myself a journalist. As I said before, I'm not a journalist. I tell people what I think. You can call me a commentator, you can call me a comic, you can call me.
But your ambition was to get the Trump into power and to create a broad tent.
It's not exactly that was the goal.
So it's almost like you're an online canvasser.
I wouldn't say it so specifically, but when I realized somewhere in the early portion of last year, when the election really started coming together, and I think maybe particularly around when Trump, when he got shot, when I started realizing like the true severity of everything, like true severity of everything, then I started feeling maybe a little bit more like, the canvasser is not the right word, or even promoter. I just knew I was in it, fighting for what I believe in. That's it. And that's what I've always done. And I think maybe it felt more on steroids in an election year, something like that, probably. And I think really for this year, look, we got the results I wanted. I would love to see, as I said before, some of those people on the right that are so focused on, whether we landed on the moon or not. How about stop doing that? Or do that, but then also focus on all of the good stuff that's happening in the country right now, of which there's a ton that I'm always focusing on. And I want to start building some new businesses now. I'm launching a tequila in a couple of weeks, which will send you a case, and you're going to love it. It's a beautiful.
I don't drink, but if you do non-alcoholic tequila, send it my way.
We don't get non-alcoholic tequila. That sounds like the most depressing thing I've ever heard.
That's something very exciting.
I'm going to send you tequila, and you can give it to your friends when they come over.
So George Clooney.
Yeah, no, we're going to blow Casamigos out of the way. Okay. Casamigos is not. He sold that
boring.
Sold that for I think $500 million. It's not a good tequila.
Yeah.
We have made a beautiful, clean tequila made the right way that I'm telling you. You don't
what
drink,
region of Mexico?
From Jalisco, from tequila.
Oh, okay.
So Jalisco, there's 4 regions.
Stupid question.
Well, no. It's not really. What region of Champagne?
What region of Champagne?
Yeah. No, there's 4 regions. It's funny. There's 4 regions, but I didn't even know until I started doing this about 2 years ago, and we went through many tinkerings with it and figuring out what barrels we wanted to put it in and everything else. And I didn't know that there was actually a town called Tequila. There are 4 regions in Mexico that you can make tequila. Jalisco is the main one that most people do. And within Jalisco is the town of Tequila. And we went to Tequila. Our distillery is right outside of Tequila. And I will tell you this, they drink a lot of tequila in Tequila. You should never go to Tequila. You cannot. Are you a former alcoholic or you just
I was a bit of a boozer.
Bit of a boozer.
I had a good time.
All right. As long as you had a good time. But what I want to do this year really is not only continue to just say what I think and be relevant and be part of the conversation and all that, and help the country in the way that I think I can, to whatever extent I have any value in any of this. But I want to start building some other businesses that are kind of ancillary businesses to what I do.
Well, if they like tequila, it sounds like they're celebratory.
Right. So tequila will be one of them.
You got Trump into power.
We're working on some tech stuff that I'm not quite privy to say right now, and just launched another company that we just got funding for. And we're just doing, look, again, the guy's on the phone over there typing away. He must be working on something he's not even listening right now. That's how focused he is. So we're doing things.
He might just be on Tinder, but yeah. He's 24-year-old. He told me he's flying around the world, following you everywhere. Yeah. He's having a blast. So, we'll
Dave, continue this over dinner, I suppose.
Absolutely.
You're going to feed me after this. That's
I'm going to
crazy.
feed you. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much for coming on the show again. And it really is a privilege. I know how busy you are. And we've got to get you to Gutfeld because he's up next.
Become a fine podcaster, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Dave.